Welcome to today's webinar, Spooked by Spending Plans. This webinar is part of the Get Savvy, Grow Your Green Stuff webinar series. We've been doing this webinar series for many years, and this year is the most ambitious schedule yet. So this is the third webinar in the series. We have several more planned over the next several months. So make sure to check those out if you haven't already. If you signed up for you registered for today's webinar, you probably saw our long schedule that we have. We have one every month for the next 5 to 6 months. So this is very exciting. This webinar and the webinar series is hosted by several universities in Illinois, including our colleagues, University of Illinois Extension, the University of Illinois Student Money Management Center, Columbia College Chicago, and North Park University in Chicago. So there's lots of financial educators across the state contributing to this particular webinar and the entire webinar series. So just a round of applause for them, a virtual round of applause for everyone that's partnering on these webinars. So my name is Andrea Pellegrini, and I am an assistant director in University Student Financial Services and Cashier Operations, and I run the Student Money Management Center for the entire University of Illinois system. So today I'm in Urbana, but sometimes I'm in Chicago and sometimes I'm in Springfield, and I work with a few grad assistants and interns to provide financial education through several different means to students at all those locations and even online students. So thank you for joining us if you're one of the University of Illinois students. And Evie, if you want to talk about yourself.
Definitely. My name is Evelyn or Evie Peterson. I am the Career Programs Manager at North Park University on the north side of Chicago. So I work in the Career Development and Internships Office and oversee both professional preparation for our students as well as some financial literacy initiatives here on campus.
Thank you, Evie. Evie is a great addition to our team, and she has that career planning perspective that's really helpful when we're talking about finances in general. So just because we want you to be familiar with that chat, I want you to know, put in the chat box, in what state and or county you are logging in from today. We've had people logging in to some of our webinars from states across the United States, and even someone from Canada last year joined one of our webinars. Oh, we have someone from Cook County in Chicago, a couple people from Champaign County, someone from Minnesota.
Ooh, Minnesota.
That's awesome. Someone from Massachusetts, Kentucky, Iowa. We love it when we have our colleagues and our friends across the state of Illinois, but also across the entire United States to join us. So keep it going in that chat. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to go move forward. So thank you for putting that in. So we're going to go over a lot of things today. We're going to help you overcome your financial fears because it is Halloween and everything's spooky, right? So we will be talking about what spending plans are, how to create them, what to consider in your income, different methods of expense tracking, which is an important part of keeping your spending plan in check, setting goals and how to recognize when your spending plan may need some modifications to better suit your needs. So that's our primary learning objectives. We're going to be covering a lot of different things related to this. There's some resources that we'll be putting in the chat throughout the webinar as well, so you can check those out later, or you can check them out as we're going through the content, and you can just listen in, and that's fine. So we're going to use that chat again because our background and our experiences influence how we make spending decisions and how we budget. What is your earliest money memory? What is the earliest thing you can remember related to money management? Maybe it's like what kind of piggy bank you had, how you stored your money, maybe some type of memory you have about having a financial conversation with your parents. What is the earliest money memory that you have? Somebody said getting pennies and birthday cards from the babysitter. And they got 1 penny per year age. That's great. So Somebody lost their buffalo head nickel. Oh, that's a sad memory. Someone said getting rewarded for staying in their own bed at night as a small child. That's a good reward. Getting allowances in high school. Trying to make money at a lemonade and face painting stand. That's a great combination. I would love to get a nice cold beverage and a face painting. Thank you. Counting grandma's change jar every time she visited. That's a great memory too. One of my memories is every time that my brother and I would go to the grocery store with my mom, we would ask for things, and she would start saying, "We have no money," and we thought it was just the most hilarious thing that she would say it in that way, and she would make it kind of loud, being in the grocery store, and it's kind of uncharacteristic for my mom. So we would just ask for things just to hear her say that there was no money. So that's one of my earliest memories. So if you want to continue sharing your memories in the chat as we go through this, that is fine. That's great. We love sharing memories. So let's talk a little bit about picturing a spending plan. So there's lots of ways to visualize your spending plans, but you need to make sure to make it concrete. And we're going to talk about ways to do that so you can turn your spending plan into a spending reality. So the reason we're talking about things as far as spending plans go is because a lot of people associate the word budget with negative feelings. They feel restricted, and that can be a scary thing for people. Essentially, budgets and spending plans are basically the same thing, but with spending plans, we're shifting the emphasis onto the planning aspect, and that helps people kind of feel like they're taking control of their finances by developing a goal-focused strategy to address spending priorities. So how we've realized this in our visual here is our little plain piggy bank is our budget. We have a mask for our perspective shift, and then that turns into a spending plan. And now we have an amazing piggy bank with a mask on. So where budgets have kind of historically been thought of as prescriptive and unforgiving, kind of like when you're on a really strict diet, your spending plan needs to be flexible. If your priorities or goals or resources or expenses change, so should your spending plan. It needs to be adaptable. So that should empower you to take control of where your hard-earned money is going. So we're going to use that chat again because it's our favorite thing. What do you think makes a spending plan or budget, if you prefer that, scary? What do you think? You can put that in the chat. Or if you're not sure what makes a spending plan scary or spending plans are not scary to you, what about budgets freaks you out? It's essentially the same exact question. What makes budgeting uncomfortable? Okay, somebody said seeing how little is left after paying your bills. Yes. The disconnect between the plan and reality. Not that I overspend, but the work and discipline needed to keep it in sync. Yes, you must have self-control. Yeah, that can be scary. That can be a little freaky. Having to hold yourself accountable for what you say you'll do. Yes, that accountability piece can be really scary, especially when we're our own worst critics. Oh, if there's a change in your monthly pay, how can you plan if you're going to have changes in your pay every month or week or whenever you get paid? And a lot of Americans have a lot of variance in their pay. It's not just students. Yes, income volatility is a big issue. Yes, Kathy. Needing to keep monitoring it. Oh, yeah, establishing a habit is hard. The logistics between keeping track of spending plan and credit cards, cash, check, auto pays. Yeah, there's lots of financial tools that you can use, and sometimes it's challenging just to see if you use a lot of different financial tools where your money is going. Excellent. So I'm going to hand it over to Evie to talk a little bit about pulling those pieces together.
Awesome. Sounds great. So we're choosing to focus on three basic components of a spending plan. And so we're going to talk about identifying your savings goals as the first piece of it, your income and other resources, and then third, your expenses. And those obviously will vary. So we'll talk kind of through how that works. But it's really important to keep in mind that expenses can be fixed or flexible or variable, as we'll use too. And when it comes to discretionary spending, you'll need to prioritize your needs over your wants, which will most likely vary quite a bit from person to person. So you really need to make sure that you're personalizing all of these pieces to understand who you are and what you need out of a spending plan. So we'll talk a little bit about income and resources. And so when it comes to income, you can see on the screen that there's a lot of different sources of income. A lot of times people, when they're thinking about managing their money or creating a spending plan, a lot of times the first thing that comes to mind is how much your salary is or what your wages are, what your take-home pay is after taxes. So there's a lot of other pieces that come in play, and so we wanted to cover just a few of those so you have an idea, and also be aware of all the resources that are posted into the chat box as I'm sharing some of these things. But for government assistance, there's the library, there's a lot of different resources that we don't always think about, but they're really important pieces for your budget puzzle. And so many Americans will use government assistance programs to cover healthcare, food, education costs, but it may not be something we consider when creating a budget. So these are useful resources and they can help us accomplish our goals and meet basic needs. So being aware of them is critical to making an efficient budget. SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, helps millions of low-income individuals and families, and we'll talk more about SNAP or food resources later in this webinar too. I know that for college students, sometimes there's food pantries or shelters close to where you go to school, and so when it becomes a necessity, to use those as a resource are important. And I know some university campuses even have their own food pantries specifically for their students. So if that becomes a need, be aware of those opportunities. In regards to community resources, not everyone qualifies for certain resources, but knowing what's available can help when hacking our budgets. So if you have great public transportation system, I know for our students here, we have the U-Pass, which is really important. When looking at your budget, consider the costs of owning a car versus using lower cost transportation options. There's a lot of choices I know for our own students, from using public transportation to Uber or Lyft, but be aware of the different costs associated with that. And then libraries are a great resource for professional development or education, entertainment, so checking out books, music, movies, even internet access if that's what you need. Cooperative extension offices are located throughout the nation and have community educators that take information from universities and share that with the communities that they serve. This is a great resource for learning. University of Illinois Extension has educators throughout the state like Sasha and Kathy that help people through things like money mentors, master gardeners, and 4-H programs. So overall, just make sure that you investigate what is in your community and on your campus to help you make the most of your resources. Sometimes resources can be a surprise, like a gift or an unclaimed asset. We'll put a link in the chat to the website unclaimed.org, where you can actually see if you have any unclaimed money somewhere that you don't know about. So this ghost is a good symbol because there is this idea of kind of tricky income with student loans. They're a special type of income and an income that you want to minimize since it is debt and does have to be repaid later. Therefore, don't rely on student loan forgiveness to magically wipe away all of your student loan debt. In most loan forgiveness programs, you do have to make minimum payments for so many years before the rest of the debt is forgiven. which then also becomes taxable, so it is still a type of debt you want to minimize, but it can be helpful in covering any gaps while you're in school. To learn more about student loans and repayment options, we had a webinar last month called Navigating Financial Aid, and we also have a student loan repayment webinar coming up in April that could be of interest to many of you. So I'm going to hand it over to Andrea, and she's going to talk about the second component of setting goals.
Thank you, Evie. So we're going to talk about SMART goals, and you've probably heard the acronym SMART goals for lots of other things. It's not just used for creating financial goals. It's used for like personal goals, nutrition goals, academic goals, all kinds of goals. And there's lots of different words associated with these acronym pieces, each one of these letters, but we're going to focus on these 5. So for the S, it needs to be specific. For instance, you can't say, I want a car. What kind of car? What color car? How old? Being as specific as possible will help you in making it a reality. It helps you kind of visualize what that goal is. Is it measurable? Can you put an amount of money next to it or a specific task next to it that you know when it's completed because it is measurable? You can make yourself accountable to that. The A, we use agreed upon. Some people use achievable or some other version of A. We use agreed upon because so few people talk about money. And if you have several people that are helping you accomplish your financial goals, or if like you're sharing costs with someone, understanding and agreeing upon what the goals is very critical to making sure that you're successful. For instance, if you're planning on going on a trip for spring break with your best friends and you want to go to Las Vegas and they want to go to New Orleans, you're not going to be able to accomplish your goal together. So think about that when you're thinking about how to make sure that your goals are agreed upon. We use realistic for R. So if you kind of assess what your resources are, what your income is, what your community resources are, and found out that what your goal is not realistic within what your resources or your income actually is, you might need to readjust some things. And for the T, it's time-based. So maybe the one thing that you have to readjust is when you want to accomplish that goal if it's not realistic given your current situation. So make sure that you are including all of these different components when you're trying to figure out whether or not something is a SMART goal. And we just want to affirm that it's okay to dream big, and a lot of people both in school and out of schools make decisions about their career based solely on debt, for instance. So if you're aware of your options and one of your goals is to pay off your student loan debt, and if you plan correctly, you shouldn't have to compromise what your career goals are to repay your loans. And I know we're focusing a little bit on loans right now, and that's just one aspect of financial goals, but a lot of students take out loans in order to graduate. And I am one of the people that I'm supportive of student loans because I would not be where I am today without student loans. But I do notice that some people compromise what their careers are to make sure to pay off debt sooner rather than later. So there's lots of ways to be smart about student loan repayment if that's your goal. Okay, so let's talk about emergency funds. These are a very important part of building a solid financial plan. If you don't have any emergency savings and you're looking to start one, the Federal Reserve Board conducts a study on the economic status of consumers in the U.S. every single year. And in 2016, 44% of adults, that's people between ages 18 and 64, said they could not cover a $400 surprise expense without borrowing money or selling something to pay for it. So even though that's an improvement compared to previous years, and now I think the 2017 report, I think said 43%. I might not be completely accurate on that. But given this information, if you're not sure where to start your emergency savings goal, maybe even a small amount like less than $500 would be a good place to start, because that's usually kind of the threshold. $300 to $400 would be a threshold to deal with a financial emergency. So even having that much set aside might be able to help you out. So when we're talking about the timing of savings goals, that can be a big component of prioritizing your goals, especially if you have lots of goals. I have lots of goals, and sometimes I have to reprioritize my goals based on what's going on in my life. So knowing what your timing is for goals can help you prioritize and identify whether or not it's an immediate goal, a short-term goal, a mid-term goal, or a long-term goal. So immediate goals are now or within the next few weeks. Short-term goals, for the purposes of this planning exercise right now, is within the next 5 years. Mid-term goals is within the next 5 to 10 years, and long-term is typically more than 10 years. And there may be some variation in what that is, what those definitions are, depending on who you talk to. But these are usually the time frames that financial planners use when creating a financial plan. And it may be important when using investments to reach your goals to recognize where they fit in kind of the financial planning language. And where you are in life may also impact what is considered a short-term goal versus what is considered a long-term goal as well. So that's kind of our general feedback. So immediate might be rent money. Short-term might be a vacation in 6 months from now. Midterm might be buying a car in 5 years, maybe after you graduate or after you get through a couple years of your first job. And then long-term might be something like retirement, for instance, or maybe you want to buy a boat and you want to pay cash for it. That might be more than 10 years. So can you think of any examples of each type of goal for you? And if you're willing, would you put that in the chat and let us know kind of where your goals fit within this immediate, short-term, mid-term, long-term time frame? And I am going to hand it back over to Evie to talk about expenses.
Woohoo! Looks like we have some people sharing some of their goals, which is awesome. So I'll have you all keep doing that if you want to. We're going to actually transition into expenses. And so let's talk a little bit about how you categorize and prioritize those expenses. So if we go to the next slide, this is just a list of a few types of expenses that you might have in your spending plan. Like we've said before, every person is going to have different expenses to consider, and there are tons of tools to help you better categorize what those expenses are. In general, our approach is you want to identify your fixed expenses and needs so that you can prioritize those first in your spending plan. So examples of those could include lodging, so rent or mortgage, healthcare, the savings goals like what we just talked about are all going to be important. We list utilities here and transportation, but these are all things to keep in mind of what are the most important ones. Fixed ones are going to be that fixed amount of money that you're spending, and then there's also going to be some that vary month to month. So that could be food, utilities can fluctuate, transportation, so if you're paying for repairs or maintenance on a vehicle, personal items, so if there's medicine or clothes, toiletries, and even dependent care could be a fluctuating and changing a variable expense. There are also discretionary or wants that you will probably have in your budget, and that could be kind of your entertainment, the outings that you do. Maybe you pay for different subscriptions, so cable, Netflix, Hulu. I know Spotify is really important for a lot of our students. And then vacations, gifts, personal items. So thinking about what can you go without when it comes to your wants are all important things to consider when you talk about expenses. So tracking tools, there's a wide variety for tracking a spending plan. And setting a goal and not tracking your progress isn't going to help. So the same method of tracking spending isn't going to work for everyone. So these are a few methods. The envelope budgeting is definitely considered old school, I would say. This is actually what I grew up with. My dad taught me this when I first started babysitting, and we would sit down and come up with a few different areas that I wanted to divide my money into. So clothes or entertainment, saving, all of those. But basically, you have different envelopes for different categories of spending, and then you put enough cash, or you can break it up by percentage of your income into that envelope to cover what you anticipate to spend that month. The trick is that once you're out of cash, you're done spending in that category that month. So it's something that you can really visibly note as you travel through the month and spend your money. We know from research that it's much more difficult to spend cash than to spend using plastic cards because you actually see your money leaving your hand. So this might be a good method for you if you struggle with recognizing that you're spending real money by swiping a card. An electronic version of this method is an app called Good Budget, and you can actually set your spending limits electronically and then manually record your purchase amounts in the app as you spend throughout the month. So this is probably a safer way of setting spending limits than carrying your whole spending budget around in cash every month. Another method is spreadsheets or other electronic methods of tracking expenses, which can be really helpful. There are hundreds of apps that you could use or other programs, or you could download Excel templates, like the one from the University of Illinois Extension's Financial Wellness for College Students, titled Making It on a College Budget. I know for North Park students, we partner with Cash Course, so our students can go to cashcourse.org and use the budget wizard on there, but there are a ton of different options. There are people that are app junkies, so I see someone's writing about mint.com and using the Mint app potentially. And I think it really varies for person to person. Everyone kind of finds the things that work well through that app for them and what might not be perfect for them as well. So thanks for your comment, Leslie. I would say mint.com is one of the most popular that I've talked to students about, but don't be afraid to compare app features to find one that works well with your habits. You can also check with your financial institution to see if there's already an expense tracking app that you can use, or you can compare existing apps already out there. Some apps will allow you to do things like transfer balance or pay bills, where other ones will only going to allow you to look at where your spending goes. So keep that in mind. There's a ton of different options. I know the couple of examples that we listed here are Mint and LearnBest. So keep that in mind. And I'm just gonna, I forgot to, on the last slide, talk about paper and pencil budgeting. So if you're not familiar with the concept of a check register or balancing your checkbook, this is the method of physically writing down all of your purchases and comparing it to your bank statements at the end of the month. So if you're more of a pen and pencil or paper person, then you can do that as well.
Has any, like, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go for it.
I've had a lot of people that were really into bullet journaling start using their bullet journal to record expenses. So that might be, that's definitely more paper and pencil method, but I thought that was interesting with the bullet journaling thing that people are getting into.
Yeah, it's a good point, definitely. Okay, so talked about apps. Obviously, there's a lot of people will use one that's associated to with their financial institution, just because it allows you to keep things centralized potentially. So if you don't already, check and see if wherever you bank or save your money, if they have an opportunity for you or an app that you can use. Okay, on to one of my favorite topics, pizza. Of course, being in Chicago, that's a huge discussion of what's the best place for deep dish pizza. But We want to see, is pizza a need or a want? So the most important thing is being able to distinguish between needs and wants. So we're just going to start with this basic question. Is pizza a need or a want? What do you all think? Anybody have any input? Want. Okay, it's looking like majority rules. But food is a need, that's a good point. Depends on day and time, can be inexpensive. Okay, so let's see. It depends. So someone already mentioned that, but there are healthier, cheaper things to eat than pizza. So it is often considered a want. But if you're diabetic, it's your only option, your sugar is dropping, the pizza is now turned into a need. So this is one way to look at needs versus wants in your budget. I try to trick myself into believing that pizza is a need, but both for my health and my budget, it's better to not have that philosophy. So just to go a little bit more in depth on needs versus wants. So on the next slide, we'll talk about that. And although everyone's needs and wants differ depending on your situation, there are a few basics such as food, clothing, and shelter that need to be taken care of. So remember, there will be a lot of temptation to spend, especially when you're a student in college. So before beginning school, you need to decide what items you will need and what items will fall into the wants category. Once you have established between your needs and your wants, you can make sure to budget for the items that you need before making plans to spend on the items that you want. To help you decide on what a need is, think about this. A need is something that if you went without it, it could jeopardize your health, safety, or livelihood. For instance, a smartphone might actually be a need for someone who needs it to do their job, but it may be a want for a retired person. So I'm going to hand it over to Andrea, and she'll talk about the different types of expenses beyond wants and needs.
Thank you, Evie. So let's say you've already decided what your needs and your wants are, but you don't know which is fixed, flexible, or occasional. So fixed expenses are those that are consistent, and they're often associated with a contract. So it might be a lease, it might be a phone contract. Those are things that are fixed. They are consistent every month or for a particular time frame. Flexible expenses vary over time. That's why they are sometimes called variable expenses. And this is the most helpful to know about when you're cutting spending, to know what your habits are with the flexible spending, if there's ebbs and flows and how much you spend each month, or if there's seasonal spending changes for these particular types of expenses. And occasional expenses are those that are regular. They might be bi-monthly or quarterly, but they sneak up on you because you can't always plan for them at a specific time or within a monthly budget, for instance. So for the game we're playing, who says that rent or mortgage is fixed, flexible, or occasional? Put that in the chat. Do you think rent or mortgage is fixed, flexible, or occasional? Everyone is saying fixed. Ding, ding, ding. That is correct because you know exactly what it's going to cost every single month. Let's talk about groceries. Are they fixed, flexible, or occasional? Oh, flexible, flexible, flexible. Oh man, we got some very, very good, knowledgeable people in the chat today. So what about water? Is it fixed, flexible, or occasional? And I have purposely left this a nuanced question because we need water, but I'm not going to explain if it's a utility or bottled water. Ta-da! Oh, fixed if it's in pipes, flexible if in bottles. That's what one person said. I think I've confused some people. The thinking caps are on. Utility fixed or flexible depending on company. I would agree with that. So if it is a utility, it could be flexible depending on the company. almost every place that I have lived, the water as a utility has been flexible because it's dependent on how much water that I used. I know that there are some like apartment complexes that will just do flat rate every month, or it's included in your rent. All right, so for the sake of time, we're gonna move forward. What about pet care? Is that fixed, flexible, or occasional? Flexible, occasional, fixed to a point. Maybe if you have insurance for your pet, that's a big thing. Occasional for medical costs, I would agree with that. I would say flexible for things like food and maybe like preventative, flea and tick preventative or heartworm preventative. Toys, man. I have a greyhound and I have spent a lot of money on toys. Sometimes that's fixed if you have a subscription box for toys, for instance. Okay, well, I could talk about dogs all day, so let's just move forward. What about a music subscription? Fixed, flexible, or occasional? It's a subscription, so what do you think it is? Flexible, or occasional, fixed. Okay, so subscriptions are usually by contract. So there's usually fixed. So for instance, Spotify, Evie, how much do you think the students at North Park pay for Spotify?
I think for most of them it varies from like $5 to $15 a month.
Yeah, I think it depends on which level you have. So my husband's a big Spotify person, and he has used the student version, but he's also used the family version, and they are different based on what you have, but they don't vary every month.
Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of our students share subscriptions too, so some of them are free.
That's true. Someone asked, but you can quit Spotify anytime, right? I don't know. I didn't sign up for that, but assuming yes.
I would think so too.
Yeah. So that might make it under flexible. But if it's the same cost every month, it's fixed. When we originally defined fixed, we said that they're often associated with contracts, but they're not always associated with contracts. So good question. Fixed is mainly that you know what to expect every month. And utilities vary because they're usually associated with how much you use them. All right, some good conversation in the chat today. So let's talk a little bit about spending secrets, because we're talking about spooky stuff and we want to know. Secrets can be spooky too sometimes. So sometimes our financial fears stem from our spending secrets. Sometimes those secrets are small, like maybe you have a low-key gum obsession, or something big like maxing out a credit card. Most people have something that they struggle with when it comes to finances. And NEFI, the National Endowment for Financial Education, has even challenged consumers in the past to share how they are spinsters, a little bit about their spending secrets. We're going to put in the chat a link to spinster stories, but there's one about a casket purchase that was really funny that you should check out later. We're not going to play it today, but it's really funny, and we're going to include it in the follow-up email that we send, or there'll be a link to it. The important thing here is that identifying where you struggle with your spending can help you curb it and develop methods of overcoming your spending temptations, and hopefully avoid having secrets. There are a lot of surveys out there that have shown that people will hide purchases or how much they spend from those they love, including people that are married or in committed relationships. So that's kind of sad, and it can cause even more issues with like communication and having agreed upon goals. So making sure to address your spending and be able to address your secrets so that you don't keep them anymore is a really good way to help with goal setting and communication. So let's talk a little bit about money personalities. There are lots and lots and lots of personality inventories out there, not just related to money, but there are several that are related to money. And we're going to put a couple of them in the chat for you to check out later. But the one that we have highlighted here is from the Money Harmony quiz by Olivia Mellon. And it helps you identify what your money personality is. You might be an amasser, an avoider, a hoarder, a monk, or a spender. An amasser is someone who wants to save all the money. An avoider is someone who doesn't want to pay attention to it, avoids it. A hoarder is someone who doesn't really want to share the money. They want to hoard it, and they want to have access to it. An amasser would probably be focused on like amassing as much wealth as possible, whereas a hoarder might just be like focused on the security aspect and having liquid assets. A money monk might have some ideas that money is evil, and so they might make spending decisions based on that ideology. And then you have the spender personality, is someone who spends a lot, and that's how their habits kind of focus, or they don't recognize the trade-offs of spending everything. So you can take the Money Harmony quiz and kind of check out where you struggle with money or what your money personality is. There's also a Money Under 35 quiz that talks about who we are with money if you're under 35. That's a useful tool too. We have done other webinars. We've talked about money scripts, or our unconscious beliefs about money and how that impacts our spending decisions. But there's lots of things to consider when you are looking at your habits and your values related to money and how that affects your spending. So we just wanted to kind of scratch the surface there to give you an idea of thinking about things differently. And if someone doesn't have the same views about money or background about money or habits related to money, that can be a cause of conflict. And understanding the differences between people can help you better identify how to have conversations with them about shared goals, or how to manage money more effectively to reach everyone's goals. All right, so in the chat, what do you think is your biggest spending secret, if you're willing to share? If you're not comfortable, don't bother. And have you ever had buyer's remorse? So if we understand what our spending secrets are and our fears are, we can better address them when talking about money and creating our spending plan. I have had buyer's remorse several times in my life. Luckily, nothing for anything super big, but it's usually related to clothes I don't wear. And then I look in my closet and I'm like, man, why did I buy that? I've never worn it. So
I totally agree. I do that with shoes, or I used to really do that with shoes.
Oh man, we're getting a lot of them. Lots of buyer's remorse. Camping equipment, buying clothes online, shoes that don't feel good after you buy them. Yes, yep. I'm with you. Going to Target and for one thing, and you come back out of the dollar section. Did I need any of that? Yeah, I understand. Target's a dangerous place. Marketers are real good at their jobs and placement of stuff.
Cross-stitching kit. That's a cool one.
Oh, man. Stock bought over the phone. Oh, man.
Good.
So many unfinished craft projects. Oh, man. I have a whole garage full of craft projects, or even like lumber for projects that I haven't finished. I haven't regretted that, though. But definitely lots of sources of buyer's remorse. Okay, let's talk about creating your spending plan. We've talked about all these different things about expenses and income and goals and timing and considerations on what types of expenses you have going on. So I'm going to hand it over to Abby to finish that up.
Okay, let's do it. So we're going to talk about the spending plan puzzle and the different pieces that go into that. So a puzzle is a good metaphor for what spending plans can be like. You need to consider lots of variables to come up with the best plan to accomplish your goals, which we've already talked about, with the resources like the income that we talked about previously as well. It's also flexible, so you can change a piece out whenever you need to or have the opportunity to. In fact, I recommend reviewing your spending plan at least potentially every 6 months, especially if you're a college student. I usually tell students at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year as you're preparing for the summer, because I know a summer spending plan can look a lot different than a school year spending plan, at least in the conversations that I have had with students. So we're going to talk through some of these pieces, and some of them we've already talked through. But to start, we're going to talk about evaluating and brainstorming. So we've talked already about these pieces, but first of all, identifying the income and the resources that you have available to you. Remember, these resources can vary. It's not just what you're making at a job, kind of your take-home pay. Remember the fixed, flexible, and occasional expenses. All of you did a great job recognizing the differences between those and knowing which is which. And then compare your income and your expenses so that you kind of know where are you at. Obviously, you want to be in the green, at least not in the red. So make sure that your income and expenses are matching well. SMART goals we've talked about. Prioritizing your spending, so know what your needs versus your wants are and your goals. So align your spending plan with these goals that you have. And then make changes as needed. We've already talked about a spending plan being a flexible document. And so be okay with making changes when things might not match up or you've had changes in situations. It's okay to make changes. So this is just an example of income and thinking about job and fellowship stipends. Maybe you have some support from a parent or a guardian. So that can all fall under income, especially as a student. And then expenses, this is just a short list. We've gone through a lot of these already. But think about, are you able to save at all? And one of your savings goals should be an emergency fund where you're slowly setting aside money that would be available in any form of an emergency. If you have rent or on campus paying to live in the dorms, a lot of times your utilities as a student might not exist, especially if you're living on campus. What are your subscriptions, the different transportation that you're using? What are you doing for food? Do you eat on campus? Are you buying your own groceries? What entertainment can you afford? Healthcare, clothing, there's a lot of pieces. These are some of the big ones that we see as we work with students in creating a spending plan. So the tools that we talked about, if you are a pen and paper person, maybe you have a notebook that you use, or you found an Excel document that works well to track. We talked a lot about apps, especially Mint or through your financial institution, and there's even software that you can use. So there's a lot of different ways, and just find the tool that works best for you. So we are putting several in the chat box, and so there will be an email too, and you can see those links and check out those tools if you're still searching for a good tool that works with you. Okay, so a quick chat again. I know we're trying to wrap up time here pretty quick, but can you identify a few ways that you can save money by spending less? What ideas do you have in ways to save money? Eat at home instead of out. That's definitely a great idea. Using the library, bringing lunch to work. Ooh, making your own tea instead of getting a latte. A meal plan. Don't purchase coffee every day. We have a Starbucks across the street, and I know it's always tempting to just stop there instead of make it at home. Great. These are are good ways to identify also needs versus wants, which we've talked about. Maybe you have an app that uses coupons when you're going shopping for groceries. Maybe you comparison shop. Redbox instead of going to the movies is a good idea too. Those are great. Okay. And then one of the other things that can sometimes be harder, but can you think of ways to diversify your income? So when you're trying to bring in money, what are some options to diversify? Sell stuff. Perfect. There's all kinds of different online portals. Donate plasma. Maybe people have a car that they don't use all the time, so they have decided to do Lyft or Uber. Freelance work is a great idea. Fill out surveys. Edit papers. I know people will hire kind of like virtual assistants so you can work from home. Tutoring is a good one. Teaching English to international students. You guys are on a roll. These are great ideas. So when you do feel like diversifying your income is a route that you need to take, there's a lot of examples that have already been provided in the chat box about ways that you can do that. So well done. Thanks for your participation. So it's also important to consider ways to cut your spending. And these are just three things to consider. And so small purchases, they can add up really quickly. And so being aware of how you're spending your money, especially in like those daily routine pieces. A lot of people obviously think of buying that cup of coffee every day, or maybe you have a favorite smoothie or kombucha as your go-to. But think about what those small purchases are, and are there ways that you can cut back or eliminate some of those? We talked about cash versus credit and how you'll be a lot more aware if you're actually using cash to pay for things versus simply swiping your plastic card. So consider practicing that with some expenses. And then time to earn. And so when you're trying to decide whether to buy something or not, calculate how many hours you have to work to pay for it. And is your time worth that? So if you're going to buy a pair of shoes and they're $100 and you have a job that pays $10 an hour, is it worth the 10 hours of work for those shoes? So one philosophy to think about your spending habits. Okay, red flags to watch for. So these are just things to keep in mind as you think about this. So spending plan, if you have a spending plan and it results in a negative number, so if your expenses are higher than your income, that is a huge red flag and that you need to make some adjustments. Forgetting to include categories in your spending plan. So as you're going through a month, maybe you realize, oh, I forgot about this gym membership or something like that. Make sure that then you make those adjustments and add it into your spending plan. Maybe you underestimate or overestimate. So if you're underestimating how much you're spending or you're overestimating how much you earn or bring in as income or resources, make sure that you're making adjustments there. Maybe there's variations in your spending or income from life transitions. Or you could be having too much money accumulate in another category. So these are all things to watch for and then change your spending plan as need be. So obviously goals can change based on your life situation and your circumstances. So can you come up with any reasons that might make you want to reprioritize your spending plan? A job change, definitely. It's a big one. Change in income, whether it's more or less. Children, moving, kids start to drive or go to another school, adding a pet to your family, marriage. Sometimes there can be medical changes, divorce. Yeah, these are great changes that people would probably experience at some point in their life. So this is why we talk about analyzing and reprioritizing, that there are going to be changes. And so it's important to recognize those changes and how that affects your spending plan, and then reprioritize based on those changes. So be aware of that. We just have some last reminders about spending plans. So always focus on spending less than what you earn. Prioritize your saving to accomplish goals. So remember the SMART goals outline that Andrea already shared with us. Remember, student loans turn into debt later, so don't rely upon them as income. Change your plan to match your needs. So spending plans are flexible, and so as your needs change, make sure that that also is reflected in your spending plan. And track your spending how you choose. Figure out what works best for you, whether it's an app, the paper and pencil, an Excel document. Know what works best for you. And I'm going to hand it over to Andrea. She's going to close us out and tell us about those cool digital badges that we could earn.
Thank you, Abby. So this particular program is part of the University of Illinois Financial Literacy Digital Badges program. So you can earn a digital badge by completing 3 spending activities. This is a spending badge eligible activity. You just have to take the quiz. So this, all the content for this program and the quiz has been put into Moodle. It used to exist elsewhere. Now it's in Moodle. So, but anyone can log in. So when you click on this link that we're putting in the chat, the go.uillinois.edu/spooky spending quiz, that didn't show up exactly right here. But once you go there, you just log in with your net ID and password if you're part of the University of Illinois system, or you can log in as a guest if you're not part of the University of Illinois system and still take steps to earn this particular badge. So if you complete this quiz, it's 1 step towards the spending badge, and we have 4 other badges that you can earn too. There's one on earning, one on saving, one on protecting, and one on borrowing. So this one counts towards spending. Definitely take that quiz. All the resources are available that we put in the chat in Moodle. So once you take the quiz, you can kind of check out all those resources and what other things you can do to earn the spending badge. Our next webinar is Planning for the Unforeseen, and it is next week on Wednesday, the November 7th. So at noon again. So we're going to talk a little bit about estate planning and how to prepare for things that we don't necessarily think about every day. So we're going to talk about that next week. Make sure to join us if you have registered. If you want to register, you can go ahead and do that, and we'll send out the login instructions as well. And please stay in contact with us. We're going to put in the chat all the different ways you can stay in contact with us, our websites, our Facebook, our Twitters, our Instagrams, our YouTubes, all kinds of ways to stay in contact with everyone in the Get Savvy Coordinators role. So thank you so much. We will stick around to answer questions, but please don't feel obligated to stay on. I know people have places to go and things to do.